global leader of eco-friendly future materials. Green tomorrow with POSCO.
Coming up on Arirang News. President Yoon renews his will to open up a new future with Japan that's even better than the best times of the past. Addressing the public live during a cabinet meeting, he says it's already happening. South Korea, the U.S. and Japan are discussing ways to share information in real time on the missile warning data against the North's threats. The trilateral group is planned to be formed as soon as possible, as the three leaders agreed in Cambodia last November. The World Bank's International Tribunal reduces the damages that it ordered the South Korean government to pay to Lone Star funds over a sale of Korea Exchange Bank. In response to Korea's annulment request, some $450,000 US have been taken off from over $200 million compensation amount. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in South Korea. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. Tonight, we begin with President Yoon Suk-yeol's live address to the public this morning. A day ahead of his one-year anniversary since taking office, President Yoon shared his vision of opening up a new future with Japan that's even better than the best times of the past. Our Kim Do-yeon leads our coverage.
Presiding over a cabinet meeting on Tuesday morning, President Yoon Suk-yeol took the microphone to follow up on Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida's visit over the weekend, saying the bilateral relationship is improving at a remarkable speed, and if the two can face history truthfully, they can open a new future even better than the good times of the past. He added that already, things are currently happening that would not have even been conceivable just a short while ago.
또 후쿠시마 오염수 처리에 관하여 우리 전문가로 구성된 현장 시찰단을 파견하기로 했습니다. 다음 주 G7 정상회의에서는 히로시마에 위치한 한국인 원폭 피해자 위령비에 한일 양국 정상이 함께 참배하기로 했습니다.
President Yoon also told his cabinet to make sure citizens really feel the improved relations with Japan with cooperation in various fields. This cabinet meeting also came as Wednesday marks the first anniversary since President Yoon's inauguration. In fact, he took this as an opportunity to remind the nation of the work carried out over the past year, highlighting diplomacy/security as the biggest changes made for the country since he took office.
정상 차원의 합의 문서인 워싱턴 선언과 핵 협의그룹 창설을 통해 미국은 핵무기를 포함한 전례 없는 수준으로 대한민국에 대한 방위를 약속하였고, 대한민국은 미 핵 자산 운용에 관한 공동 기획, 공동 실행을 통해 확장 억제를 한층 강화할 수 있게 됐습니다.
To further back his self-assessment, he mentioned attending a NATO summit for the first time for a South Korean president. He also re-emphasized his role as the nation's #1 salesman and mentioned the foreign investment and export deals that he was able to achieve throughout his term so far. A bit of difference in tone came as he turned to domestic politics, as he said there's still much to do. Naming a few ongoing issues such as housing rental scams, the nation's former chief prosecutor said fraud against the working class and younger generations is a crime against the underprivileged. In addition, he pledged to fight against the rising illicit drug usage among teens through tougher law enforcement. According to the Senior Secretary for Public Relations, President Yoon wrapped up the cabinet meeting by calling for his officials to be firm in implementing major policies in line with Yoon administration's values to transform the country over the next 4 years. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
South Korea says talks are underway to share North Korean missile warning information in real time with the United States and Japan. Our Lee reports more on the three nations' security cooperation.
South Korea, the United States, and Japan are currently in the process of discussing ways to share real-time warning information on North Korean missiles. That's according to South Korea's Defense Ministry spokesperson Chun Ha-gyu speaking to reporters on Tuesday.
We could tell you more when things are decided. As of right now, no decisions have been made.
Missile warning data covers information such as launch points, impact points, and trajectory flights. In addition to these, missile information data covers other things such as detection, tracing, and combat engagement. The Japanese newspaper Yomiuri Shimbun reported the same day that the South Korean military, U.S. forces in South Korea, and Japan's self-defense forces are considering ways to share real-time missile information by linking their radars and other command and control systems. That is reportedly via the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command Network. Currently, South Korea and Japan are independently linked to the U.S. radar systems, but not to each other's. When asked whether the U.S. system would be used to share the information, South Korea's defense ministry referred to the three countries' previous negotiations to fully utilize TISA, or the Trilateral Information Sharing Arrangement, signed by Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo back in 2014.
I've said that we discuss ways to fully utilize existing systems like TISA to share real-time North Korean missile warning information back in April at the South Korea, U.S. Japan defense trilateral talks.
TISA allows the sharing of classified military information between South Korea and Japan concerning North Korea's nuclear weapons and missiles via mediation and approval from the U.S. Department of Defense. Separately, back in November, Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo agreed to share North Korean missile warning information at a trilateral summit held in Phnom Penh. When asked whether the matter will be discussed by the defense ministers of the three countries at the Asian Security Council set to be held in Singapore early next month, spokesperson Chun said that the agenda and meeting schedule are still in the planning stage. Meanwhile, a senior official at South Korea's presidential office said a trilateral group will be formed as soon as possible to share real-time missile information. 이시후, 아리랑 뉴스.
Marking President Yoon's 1 year at the top office, this week we take a look at what the administration has been working on throughout that time. Tonight, it's about diplomacy, with the administration putting much effort into boosting trilateral cooperation with the U.S. and Japan. Our senior foreign affairs correspondent, Peun-ji, takes a closer look at South Korea's efforts to find balance in the shifting global order.
To boost relations with Washington, President Yoon made state visit to the U.S., the first one in 12 years for a South Korean leader. In an address to the U.S. Congress, he stressed that their relationship is stronger than ever. Since taking office, Yoon has also focused on restoring relations with Japan and has resumed the so-called shuttle diplomacy with Japan for the first time in more than a decade. In a cabinet meeting on Tuesday, President Yoon himself praised his policies on foreign affairs and national security, saying those are the fields that changed the most during his first year in office. To strengthen trilateral cooperation with the U.S. and Japan, he also said the leaders of the three countries will hold a summit in Japan next week on the sidelines of the G7 Hiroshima summit.
지난달 국빈 방미 계기에 합의한 워싱턴 선언으로 한미 간의 대북 확장 억제를 강화한 데 이어 한미일 안보 공조를 통해 영내 평화를 구축하기 위한 연대를 보다 공고하게 해 나갈 수 있을 것입니다.
But as the three countries continue to boost their trilateral cooperation, relations with China and Russia have been deteriorating. Last month, China lodged a protest over President Yoon's remarks to the effect that increased tensions around Taiwan are due to attempts to change the status quo by force. Beijing's Foreign Minister Qin Gang went so far as to warn that those who, quote, play with fire on Taiwan will eventually get burned. Russia also criticized the South Korean leader for saying Seoul would consider arming Ukraine in the event of a major new attack against Ukrainian civilians. In response, the Russian government said South Korea has taken a rather unfriendly position towards Moscow and warned that supplying military aid to Ukraine would signify a certain involvement in the conflict. Assessing Yoon's first year, an expert told Arirang News that South Korea had no other option but to focus on strengthening relations with the U.S. and Japan, and that the country needs to have some kind of principle to adjust to this new kind of turbulent world order.
I think it's kind of inevitable at this moment because North Korea has relentlessly developed their nuclear capability, and definitely South Korea needed to enhance their deterrence capability. In that sense, the trilateral security cooperation is one of the few options that South Korea can take at this moment to deter the North Korea's nuclear threat.
He added that now is the time to have strategic ambiguity while having strategic clarity at the same time. 배은지, Arirang News.
What was notably different from the previous Moon administration during the past year was the current Yoon administration's North Korea policy, taking a more hardline approach. Our foreign affairs correspondent Choi Min-jung explains.
Over the past year, President Yoon has pursued a hardline stance toward North Korea, mainly to counter Pyongyang's evolving nuclear threats. In August 2022, 3 months after taking office, Yoon proposed his main North Korea policy, dubbed the Audacious Initiative. The president offered to support Pyongyang in reviving its crippled economy in return for efforts toward denuclearization.
저는 북한이 핵 개발을 중단하고 실질적인 비핵화로 전환한다면 그 단계에 맞춰 북한의 경제와 민생을 획기적으로 개선할 수 있는 담대한 구상을 지금 이 자리에서 제안합니다.
However, North Korea slammed Yoon's initiative, calling it foolish, and instead ramped up its missile activities. Last year alone, North Korea test-launched over 70 ballistic missiles. In response, the South Korean government responded by strengthening extended deterrence capabilities with the U.S. through joint drills and more recently by coming up with the Washington Declaration. Yoon also took a hardline approach when dealing with the regime's human rights issues. In March, the government released a report on North Korea's human rights abuses to the public. The annual report had not been made public in the past, reportedly to avoid provoking Pyongyang.
처참한 인권 유린의 실상이 국제사회에 낱낱이 드러나야 합니다. 통일부뿐만 아니라 교육부 등을 포함한 정부 각 부처는 이번 보고서 발간을 계기로 북한 인권 실상을 국내외에 널리 알리고 가르쳐야 합니다.
An expert says Yoon's strong North Korea policy makes sense as the regime is focused on its nuclear and missile capabilities.
No amount of engagement effort is going to suffice to entice North Korea to come back to the negotiation table. So it's only natural for South Korea and the international community to come out with a very strong response to that. And
Yoon has been taking a much more proactive approach compared to the former Moon Jae-in administration, as he said that Seoul must completely distance itself from the kind of peace that relies on the goodwill of the other party. However, some point out that the current administration could do more to ensure stability and security on the Korean peninsula. Choi Min-jung, Arirang News.
South Korea is sending a team of experts to Fukushima later this month for an inspection of Japan's planned release of wastewater from the destroyed nuclear power plant into the Pacific Ocean. Han Sung-woo covers the response to the planned inspection.
Will South Korea's delegation of experts heading to Fukushima be able to conduct a meaningful inspection of the crippled nuclear power plant there? Or will the inspection fall short of an actual, proactive verification of the safety of Japan's wastewater discharge plans? It's a question Koreans are anxious to find the answer to, with some analysts voicing concerns that the inspection team might just end up being an audience for on-site explanations provided from the Japanese government.
Having joint investigation of the site, I think has more symbolic meaning than actual and empirical substance. We cannot know at the moment what kind of health hazard it can cause later on.
Japan had previously allowed Taiwan to send its own 8-member squad to inspect the power plant in March last year. It agreed to the dispatch at the time in consideration of Taiwan not being a member state of the International Atomic Energy Agency, which had already formed an inspection team of IAEA officials and international experts, including from South Korea. Some civic groups, including the Korea Federation for Environmental Movements, have claimed, though, that South Korea's upcoming dispatch could unintentionally provide Japan with the justification it needs for the wastewater discharge. 한성우, Arirang News.
On the health front, the nation weighs up downgrading the COVID alert level to ease the remaining virus prevention rules, like the mandatory self-quarantine. The decision is expected as early as this Thursday. Song Yu-jin reports.
Following the World Health Organization's declaration that COVID-19 is no longer a global health emergency, health authorities in South Korea are discussing further relaxing the country's virus rules. The remaining mandates are the 7-day quarantine for those who test positive for the virus and mask wearing at high-risk facilities like hospitals and pharmacies. The Korea Disease Control and Prevention Agency said back in March that the scrapping of virus protocols would happen in 3 stages. 1, lowering COVID-19's national crisis level from the highest serious to the second highest alert. Under this measure, the self-isolation period will be shortened from 7 to 5 days, and inbound travelers to South Korea will no longer be advised to take a PCR test within 3 days of arrival. 2, downgrading COVID-19 to a level 4 infectious disease, the lowest in the country's 4-tier system, from level 2. With this, mask wearing will no longer be a requirement regardless of location, while self-isolation will also no longer be required, with both just advised. 3, treating COVID-19 as an endemic disease. Mask wearing and quarantine are not even advised. As of now, the implementation of Stage 1 is highly likely. The KDC has been repeatedly saying Stage 1 will be implemented once the WHO declares an end to COVID-19 status as a public health emergency of international concern. But another possible scenario is jumping straight to Stage 2. South Korea's National Advisory Committee on Infectious Diseases held a meeting on Monday to discuss the easing of COVID-19 protocols. At the meeting, most experts agreed on integrating steps 1 and 2, scrapping mandatory quarantine, considering the stable virus situation both at home and abroad. And the KDC held an emergency assessment meeting on Tuesday afternoon with the same agenda. Based on the outcomes of the 2 meetings, the Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasures Headquarters will make the final call. The decision will be made either this week or next, as Prime Minister Han Duck-soo, who convenes meetings of the body, won't return from a trip to Europe until this Thursday. Song Yu-jin, Arirang News.
The International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes, or ICSID, has cut the amount of compensation that the Korean government has to pay to the American private equity firm Lone Star by about $480 million. According to the nation's Justice Ministry on Tuesday, the ICSID accepted the South Korean government's request to do so due to a miscalculation of the interest payment made earlier. In August last year, ICSID ordered South Korea to pay $216.5 million to Lone Star. This came under a suit that was filed by the firm back in 2012, claiming that it was forced to pay unfair taxes and suffered losses due to what it called a deliberate delay in approving a profitable deal. The ministry is reportedly planning to review whether to file a suit to reverse the compensation order. In other news, Taiwan and Vietnam are reportedly seeing their exports of chips to the U.S. expand as China sees its related shipments shrink. Our Lee Dae-yeon has the details.
The escalating chip war between the U.S. and China is opening up a new front for Taiwan and Vietnam. Recent analysis released by the Federation of Korean Industry shows that both countries boosted their share of chip shipments to the U.S. as China saw its share drop. The data compared shares of U.S. chip imports in 2018 and 2022 and showed Taiwan's share increasing to 19.2% last year, up 9.7 percentage points from 2018. Taiwan in 2022 topped the list of U.S. chip import share by country. Vietnam, meanwhile, accounted for 9.8%, climbing 7.3 percentage points from 2018, ranking in 5th place last year. On the other hand, China, which used to be the top chip exporters to the U.S., dropped to 11.7% in 2022 from over 30% of the import share in 2018. South Korea kept its 3rd place ranking in both 2018 and 2022, with its import share slightly increasing by 1.8 percentage points last year. The gap between South Korea and Taiwan now stands at 6.6 percentage points, with Taiwan turning the tables over the 4-year period. The Federation of Korean Industries also says Taiwan and Vietnam's huge jump during recent years is largely due to them replacing China, specifically in terms of computers and related components, which had been major export items from China to the U.S. As a result, China's share dropped 15 percentage points, while Taiwan and Vietnam rose almost 7 and 3.5 percentage points each. The two countries also expanded their proportion by focusing on rapidly growing sectors such as integrated circuits and LEDs, solar cells, and modules. The agency also added that South Korea should also strengthen domestic chip production while diversifying chip export items, as the government is currently working to expand tax credits in advanced strategic industries investments. Lee Dae-hyun, Arirang News.
Back here on the local front, South Korean firms are engaging in their own form of friendshoring amid growing competition for key materials in the production of EV batteries. Jung Eun-ju explains.
POSCO, a South Korean steelmaking company, is building a lithium production plant near Salt Lake located in Argentina's Andes Mountains by securing a stake that is 1/3 the size of Seoul. Lithium is a key material for electric vehicle batteries. The company plans to produce 25,000 tons of lithium annually starting in the first half of next year. That's roughly enough to make 600,000 electric vehicles.
Through intensive exploration activities, the official lithium reserve amounted to 13.5 million tons at the end of 2020, a more than a 6-fold expansion.
With the electric vehicle market growing, the price of lithium has jumped more than 10-fold in the last 2 years, giving the metal the nickname white oil. Demand for lithium is expected to increase 40 times by 2040, but South Korea is dependent on China and Chile for 95% of its imports. In response, South Korea's battery companies are diversifying their import sources to the U.S., Canada, and Australia to secure a stable lithium supply chain. Not only lithium, but also cobalt sulfate, manganese carbonate, and graphite, all of which are core materials for rechargeable batteries, are heavily dependent on imports from China. Subsequently, the South Korean government has selected 10 strategic core minerals and decided to increase the stockpile of minerals with high supply risks, so it's possible to release them in the market quickly in case of a supply-demand disruption. The government also plans to increase financial and tax support to promote private companies' development of overseas resources and reduce import dependency from certain countries to 50% by 2030.
Supply-demand uncertainty of key minerals is increasing. Stably securing core minerals amid environmental changes is an essential task for South Korea's sustainable industrial management, as the country relies on imports for 95% of its minerals demand.
The South Korean government has additionally decided to create a legal basis for supporting the core mineral industry and establish a circulation system for recycling waste batteries. Jung Eun-ju, Arirang News.
The first Korean culture center in Northern Europe has opened in Stockholm, Sweden. South Korean Prime Minister Han Duck-soo said in his congratulatory remarks at the inauguration ceremony on Monday local time that the new center will serve as a bilateral channel for cultural exchange and mutual understanding, especially among younger generations. Joining him was Swedish Foreign Minister Tobias Billström, who said the Korean wave, or Hallyu, is increasing in popularity among Swedish people, even saying his 14-year-old daughter loves Korean food. Another Korean cultural center will open on Tuesday in Vienna, Austria, which will add up to a total of 13 such centers in Europe. World-renowned soprano Jo Soo-mi will be performing at the opening ceremony.
More sunshine is in the forecast tomorrow with warmer than average temperatures. A high-pressure system covering a large part of South Korea will push temperatures into the mid-20s. For Seoul, highs will be topping out at 25 degrees for the daytime. This unseasonable heat will be lasting until Thursday afternoon. The sun's UV radiation will be strong nationwide. UV ray levels will range from high to very high nationwide. Make sure to wear your sun protective items when heading out. In the meantime, western regions are forecast to see dense layers of fog for the morning hours. Visibility is forecast to drop to below 1 kilometer, so drivers are urged to use extra caution. Morning lows will be about 1 to 3 degrees higher than today. Seoul and Gwangju will be starting off at 12 degrees. And sunny spells will dominate nationwide by the daytime. Highs in Seoul and Daegu will be reaching 25, Gwangju 26, Gyeongju will be making it to 24 degrees. And temperatures will be returning to the seasonal norms on Friday. That's all for now, and here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all for tonight's newscast. Thank you for watching. We'll be back with the most up-to-date news tomorrow. Have a good night.
I'm live! 저를 도와주시는 분들이
저희와 함께 해주시는 세션분들
아무리 봐도 없지 펜션 같은데 아니라고 아무도 안 하는 거고